Hi everyone and welcome to my channel English Fluency Lab, where I help you improve your English language skills. Friends, in this video, I'm going to cover the rules for apostrophes. Now, I do realize, friends, that with tools like ChatGPT, Google Gemini and Microsoft Copilot, things like apostrophes and other punctuations have been more or less taken care of. But this video will be beneficial for students who have to give exams in written English and for people who are giving the competitive exams like IELTS and TOEFL. So let's dive into the video straight away. There are 5 rules I have covered in this video. After every rule, we'll have a quiz. And at the end, we will have a consolidated quiz on all the 5 rules. So shall we get started? Let's go. Let us start with rule number 1. Now, rule number 1 says, use an apostrophe to indicate possession with nouns. A singular noun forms the possessive by adding apostrophe and s. Right, so that is the first rule. A singular noun forms the possessive by adding apostrophe and s. Now, how do you do that? Write the noun, change no letters, drop no letters, and then simply add apostrophe and s. This rule is always the same for each singular noun. Now, this particular thing is very important. Write the noun, change no letters, drop no letters, and then simply add apostrophe s. Example, baby, babies, apostrophe s, cow, cows, apostrophe and s, Mr. Bass, Mr. Basses, apostrophe and s, right? So this is the first rule. Now, what you need to remember, friends, is that some authorities feel that only an apostrophe is needed when the noun ends in the letter s. Now, that works okay for written material, but if you say it, you must say the extra s sound. Therefore, the letter s is necessary in written material also. Right, so there may be a conflict out here because there is another school of thought which thinks otherwise, but this is the general rule. All right, so that is rule number 1. Now let's take a quiz on rule number 1. Right, there are going to be 5 questions, and with what you have learned in rule number 1, I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Tell me where the apostrophe and s is going to be applied. Question number 1. The boy bike is in the backyard. Number 2. James' car was in the accident yesterday. Number 3. Mr. Jones' talk was the best yet. Number 4. What happened to that horse leg? Number 5. That woman umbrella is blowing away in the wind. Now, friends, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to answer this. If you want, you can pause the video for longer. And after that, we look at the answers. Your 10 seconds start now. All right, let us look at the answers with what you have learned in rule number 1. The boy's bike is in the backyard. You have the apostrophe and the s out here. Number 2, James's car was in the accident yesterday. Okay, look at the pronunciation. In fact, just hear the pronunciation. It's James's. There is the stress on the extra s. James's car was in the accident yesterday. Number 3, Mr. Jones's talk was the best yet. Mr. Jones's. Number 4, what happened to that horse's leg? Horse's leg. Number 5, that woman's umbrella is blowing away in the wind. So those were the answers for rule number 1. Let us now move on to rule number 2. What does rule number 2 say? Use an apostrophe to indicate possession with nouns, right? A plural noun that does not end in s, the letter s, forms the possessive by adding apostrophe and s, just like the singular noun. So in the earlier rule number 1, we talked about singular noun. Here we are talking about the plural noun. Okay, the rule remains the same. Write the noun, change no letters, drop no letters, and then simply add apostrophe s. This rule is always the same for each plural noun and does not end in the letter s. Right? All right. For example, men, men's. Okay, men is a plural, and you have men with the apostrophe s. That's the example. All right, let's take a quiz on rule number 2. Right, again, I'm going to give you 5 questions. Question number 1. These women hats are sold in this store. These women hats are sold in this store. Number 2. The children party was a great success. Number 3. The mice tracks were everywhere in the dust. Number 4. We followed the 2 deer tracks in the snow. Number 5. The geese fight was smooth and graceful. Right? The geese flight was smooth. Sorry, that's flight. The geese flight was smooth and graceful. All right, your 10 seconds for rule number 2 start now. All right, let us look at the answers for rule number 2. First one, these women's hats are sold in the store. Women, apostrophe and S, plural. Number 2, the children's party was a great success. Number 3, the mice's tracks were everywhere in the dust. Number 4, we followed the 2 deer's tracks in the snow. And number 5, the geese's flight was smooth and graceful. Right. So those are the answers to rule number 2. Let us move on to rule number 3 for apostrophes. What does rule number 3 say? Use an apostrophe to indicate possession with nouns. A plural noun that ends in a S forms the possessive by adding just the apostrophe sign. Now, this is something you need to remember. A plural noun that ends in the letter S. Okay, the earlier plural noun, which is in rule number 2, was different. A plural noun that ends in the letter S forms the possessive by adding just the apostrophe and not the apostrophe and S. Okay, write the noun, change no letters, drop no letters, and then simply add the apostrophe sign. This rule is always the same for each plural noun that ends in the letter S. Right? To be sure, you need a possessive and not just a plural. Say the word followed by what. Now, if you want to be sure that you need a possessive and not just a plural, which is rule number 2, say the word followed by what. Example, I saw those girls. Right? Girls, what? Okay, you have said the word what. Okay, nothing. I mean, you're not getting a reply. I saw those girls. Girls what? You're not getting a reply. Girls is a plural in this case. However, I saw those girls' gloves. Girls what? The gloves. Okay, so girls is a possessive out here, right? So if you want to find out if it's a possessive or a plural, you need to ask the question what, right? And here are the 2 examples for that. Let us now take a quiz on rule number 3. All the pupils' seats were taken. Number 2, mud had covered all of the girls' dresses. 3, the lawyer's fees came to $1 million. 4, the alien's house burned to the ground last night. Number 5, the sailor's parents were very worried by the news. Your 10 seconds for rule number 3 start now. All right, let us look at the answers. All the pupils' seats were taken. You just add the apostrophe out here. Number 2, mud had covered all of the girls' dresses. Mud had covered all of the girls' dresses. 3, the lawyer's fees came to $1 million. The lawyer's fees came to $1 million. Number 4, the alien's house burned to the ground last night. The alien's house burned to the ground last night. And number 5, the sailor's parents were very worried. The sailor's parents were very worried by the news. So those are the rules. Those are the answers for rule number 3. Let us now look at rule number 4. Use an apostrophe to indicate possession with nouns. Use the apostrophe with the last name only for joint ownership. Okay. Let's look at an example. Carl and Helen's cat was stuck up the tree. So we are talking of joint ownership out here. Carl and Helen's ownership. Right? So you will use the apostrophe only with the last name. You will not use the apostrophe with the first name. Right? Carl and Helen's cat was stuck up the tree. Let's look at the quiz for rule number 4. Right? Question number 1. Smith and Johnson store sells almost everything possible. 2. Jim and Jeff apartment was really dirty. 3. We can borrow Jean and Fred boat for tomorrow. Number 4. The cat and mouse game ended abruptly. 5. The buyer and salesman discussion brought the buyer a new car. Your 10 seconds for rule number 4 start now. All right, people, let us look at the answers for rule number 4. First one, Smith and Johnson's store sells almost everything possible. Joint ownership. Number 2, Jim and Jeff's apartment was really dirty. Jeff's apartment. Number 3, we can borrow Jean and Fred's boat for tomorrow. Number 4, the cat and mouse's game ended abruptly. And number 5, the buyer and salesman discussion brought the buyer a new car. Right. So those were the answers for rule number 4, where we talked about joint ownership. Let us now go to rule number 5. Rule number 5 says, use an apostrophe to indicate possession with nouns. Use an apostrophe with each name to show separate ownership. In rule 4, we talked about joint ownership. Here we are talking of separate ownership. So what is different out here? Use an apostrophe with each name, right? Earlier we talked about an apostrophe only with the second name. But if you want to talk about separate ownership, you have to use an apostrophe with each name. Example, Becky's and Pam's dolls were lost. You have the apostrophe with the S in both because we are talking of separate ownership. Okay, now let's look at the quiz for rule number 5. Alina and Eric sleds were both well used. Number 2, the children and infants' clothing were in different parts of the store. Number 3, the hounds and the fox tracks were the same direction, or went the same direction, sorry. Number 4, the bee and the butterfly lives are totally different. And number 5, both men and women hats are sold in this store. Your 10 seconds for rule number 5 start now. All right, let us look at the answers for rule number 5. Okay, so I have the thing displayed out here completely. Alina and Eric's sleds were both well used. You have an apostrophe for both. The children and infants' clothing were in different parts of the store. The hounds and the foxes' tracks, apostrophe for both. Number 4, the bees and the butterflies' lives, apostrophe for both. And both men and women's hats are sold in the store. So those were the answers to rule number 5. So friends, I hope the 5 rules for apostrophe are clear. Now what we'll do is we will take a quiz, consolidated quiz on rule number 1 to rule number 5. So are you ready to get started? Let's go. All right, let's get started with the consolidated quiz on rules number 1 to rule number 5. Right? So here are your 10 questions. Question number 1. The men and boys' boots were all mixed together. Okay, talking about separate ownership. Number 2, Tess' mother lives next door to us. Number 3, the dog growls scared the baby in the neighbor yard. Number 4, both Mark and Stephanie hair is red. It talks about separate ownership. Number 5, Matthew and Sarah mother came to the performance. Talks about joint ownership. 6, the babies and the children fun ended with the parents' return. Joint ownership. Number 7, the men hoods covered their faces. Number 8, the roof was covered with several chickens' feathers. And number 9, I could hardly bear the puppy bark. Number 10, the wolf's howls came sharply to the deer ears. Now friends, I realize that you're going to need a little more than 10 seconds for this. I'm going to pause the video for 10 seconds. You can pause it for a longer time if you like. And after that, we will look at the answers. Your 10 seconds start now. All right, let us look at the answers. First one, the men's and boys' boots were all mixed together. Remember separate ownership? Number 2, Tess's mother lives next door to us. Okay, apostrophe and an S. Number 3, the dog's growl scared the baby in the neighbor's backyard. Dogs, neighbors. Number 4, both Mark's and Stephanie's hair is red. Separate ownership. Number 5, Matthew and Sarah's mother came to the performance. Joint ownership. The babies and the children's fun ended with the parents' return. Right. Talking about joint ownership. Remember parents, it ends in the letter S and hence only apostrophe out here. Number 7, the men's hoods covered their faces. Number 8, the roof was covered with several chickens' feathers. Chickens ends with the letter S, so only an apostrophe sign. Number 9, I could hardly hear the puppy's bark. And finally, number 10, the wolf's howls came sharply to the deer's ears, right? Apostrophe and an apostrophe and an S. So friends, how many did you get correct? Please put your scores in the comments box. And if you have found value in the video, please give me a like. Please subscribe to my channel. And please do press the bell because I keep coming up with videos like these to help you improve your English language skills. Thank you so much for all your support, and I will see you in the next one.